So with that, we're gonna hear, for the first time, we have keynote speakers. And in the past, we usually have, like I said, it's for us by us. So it's other practitioners sharing their lessons learned from the trenches. And so as I was talking to one of such practitioners, it was Ray Kung from Atlassian. We were just comparing notes, and if some of you may remember Ray, he was a presenter at 2019 TechKnowCon at Twitter. So Ray told me how he's doing something really cool at Atlassian, and I was like, really, what? And he's like, well, I read this book called Creating Your Dojo, and it's about upskilling your engineering organization or other sort of technical knowledge folks. And it's really cool. So I went and I got the book and I read it, and I was like, wow, this is actually really cool. I wish I had this when we were doing Twitter University. And then I reached out to Ray and I said, hey, do you think the authors might be interested in presenting to this community? So I reached out to Dion and Joel, and so they said yes, and I'm very grateful for that. And so this is the first time we sort of have authors of a book come and talk to us on something that's very relevant to many of us. So with that, I'd like to introduce Dion and Joel. Let me stop sharing.
Okay, thanks, Marco. Hi, everybody. Thanks for inviting us into your community. We're really excited to be here and sort of exchange some ideas. Just very briefly, Joel and I both have very similar backgrounds. We started off as developers, moved into architecture roles. We've each been doing coaching for over 15 years, kind of basic agile coaching, technical coaching, as well as product coaching. We are not really from sort of traditional learning and development roles, although as coaches, we've often had to work with or partner with people in learning and development or parts of the organizations that we coach in. For the past 6 years, we've been experimenting with this dojo model that the book is about and that we're going to talk a little bit more about today.
Yeah, so the key takeaway there from Dion was Dion and I were engineers for a large part of our life. We were engineers, and we were trying to learn things, and then we were coaching and we were trying to teach things. And we've kind of seen these patterns from both the learning side as well as we've contributed to these problems as well, right? In teaching courses, we've taught test-driven courses, CD courses, those kinds of things. And these are the kind of core problems we see. Like when people come into courses, they're in this environment where they're learning new things, but it's a sandbox, right? I'm teaching you test-driven, but all of the tests are easy and the code is new and there's no legacy code laying around. And so it's easy to write tests, or you're trying to deploy to the cloud and there is no security to get in your way. There's these pristine environments, and it's not reality. And there's also this other common problem where we don't understand the delta between tacit and explicit knowledge. We don't understand the difference between what can be shared and what has to be experienced. And there's also this thing, again, that Dion and I have contributed to around the skill isolation, that we're going to come in and we're going to teach you this one particular skill. We're going to teach you how to deploy Kubernetes. We're going to teach you how to build Docker containers. We're going to teach you how to write tests, but we're not going to worry about that other stuff. And these seem to be the challenges. And so no matter how good we were at teaching, there is always that bridge. Everybody gets it in the class, but then there's that bridge. Now I have to go back to my different environment and my different work. And how do I cross that bridge and actually start using these things and having them help me? And that's the pattern we saw, and that's the pattern we try to address.
All right, so very high level definition of a dojo for those of you who might not be familiar with it. This model that has evolved is a dojo is a physical or now a virtual space since March, where teams undergo an immersive whole team learning experience. So the whole team aspect is very important. The other thing about this model is it is a commitment. So The sort of standard approach is for teams to come into a dojo for a 6-week time period. And during that 6 weeks that they're in the dojo, they're in there full time. Now, they're not learning 100% of the time. Part of the time in there might be doing their daily operations work or support work or whatever the kind of normal activities they have to do are. But they are there in this separate physical space. And during this time period, the focus is on learning over delivery. So we're making an actual physical space for them to work in, and we're also setting aside space in the team schedule to allow time for this learning to occur. The word dojo, it's not an acronym. That's a question we get sometimes. It's a Japanese word. It comes from martial arts, and Zen meditation studios were also called dojos. It literally means place of the way. And we feel like that is a very apt metaphor for creating these environments where teams go to upskill.
So we talked about those problems we're looking to fix with this approach. We talked earlier a few minutes ago about this idea of a sandbox, right? And so a key aspect of the dojo is the teams that are coming in are doing their actual work in their actual organization, and they're learning things and applying them immediately as the things arise. And so if they're trying to learn how to do test-driven practices, they're doing it with their product in their code. If they're learning how to deploy it to the cloud, they're deploying their product, and they have to think about, and they have to go through their constraints in their world. To give you an idea of why this is so important, we had one client that this is going to sound ridiculous, but I'm almost positive this was true. They had more AWS certified engineers or architects than Amazon. Right, so it's a big company. They had more certified, cloud architects than Amazon themselves, but inside their own organization, they were unable to deploy anything. Now, of course, how is that even possible? Well, again, it comes back to that sandbox. When you're in the sandbox and you don't have the constraints that your organization puts on you, you succeed and you can practice and you can use all the new services and all the ways of deploying things. But when you get back into your organization, that might not be as fast moving as the test, or it might have more constraints. You're not as productive. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to learn in the moment, and we're learning in the moment while you're doing your work. And that's how we make these things contextual. It enriches the learning experience by making it part of what you do.
The second problem that Joel referenced a minute or two ago was this idea of balancing tacit versus explicit knowledge. So explicit knowledge is knowledge that can be externalized. We can document it, we can put it on a wiki, we can write tutorials. I would say that even videos are a form of explicit knowledge. We're kind of taking knowledge we have and trying to put it out there in a form that could be consumed asynchronously by other people. The other type of knowledge is tacit knowledge, and this is a little bit fuzzier, a little bit more esoteric. Tacit knowledge is hard to write down. It may, in some cases, even be hard to verbalize, and it's definitely harder to share. One example of this comes from the medical field. And there have been studies where they found if you go and interview doctors and ask them a question, how do you treat diagnosis XYZ? If you're having that conversation in that interview in the doctor's office, they tend to fall back on sort of textbook and standard training answers. Well, this is the standard treatment for that diagnosis. However, if you go and do rounds with them, and they are in that rich contextual environment of actually treating a specific patient with a specific sort of exposure to a certain diagnosis, a lot of information comes out of their head that might not come out if you just do that sort of interview in their office. So there's a lot of evidence that says we can't even access all the knowledge in our heads until we're in a contextual environment where we really do need to call upon it. This is important, obviously, because you're not going to be able to turn that kind of knowledge easily into some explicit form of knowledge. The other thing about this is we've learned that learning is social. There's this social aspect to it. And that social aspect is largely based around these feedback loops. If we're working with someone directly in real time, trying to help them learn something, that feedback loop that's immediate and right then and there is incredibly important for learning to occur.
This is one of my favorite aspects of the dojo. When we're working with teams inside the dojo, we're trying to avoid this idea of skill isolation. We're trying to make sure that we don't just make the DevOps person really good at DevOps, and we don't just make the product person really good at product. We stress with the teams that fundamentally what we're trying to do is we're trying to improve the way you deliver value, the way you deliver across the whole value stream. And so what we find a lot is that there's the integration of the skills. It's the seams that span, delivery to product discovery to deployment. That's where the interesting things happen. And so by all means, we've worked with teams that really just wanted to get good at continuous delivery. They just wanted more pipelines. But like, if all you're doing is building a pipeline and you're pushing out bad product after bad product, I don't know if that's really if you're really solving the root problem, if learning how to do that faster is the thing you want to do. And so we stress with teams. And so teams, as Dion mentioned, are with us for 6 weeks. Early on in that experience, we're helping them understand their product pretty substantially. In a lot of engineering organizations, they don't really understand the needs of their product. And so we go through some product exploration things. But imagine if a team gets good at product discovery, and then they have good context of what the problems they're trying to solve are, and they can make that slice very small, and they can actually apply good engineering practices to it, and then they can deploy it rapidly. But they can also use the skills that they've learned to instruments and put metrics around the deployment that feeds back into the discovery. And it's by reinforcing that context, by looking at the seams and how these skills interact, you get a more impactful learning experience. People want to make a difference. And what we're trying to stress here in this dojo is that it's not just about writing code faster or deploying it faster. It's about how do all these things help each other. And that makes a much richer experience.
So in my opinion, metaphors are incredibly powerful and important. There's one that is kind of detrimental to the work that we do and your community does. And I think that is probably a set of metaphors actually around what knowledge is. And we treat knowledge as if it was a thing. It's like a car we can throw on a cargo ship, and we can transfer it around and hand it off from one person to another. Because it's this thing and we can make it explicit and externalize it, we can manage it really easy because it's just this thing. I think that's patently false. And on the good side of the sort of metaphor is this dojo concept. So because we took this word dojo and sort of modeled these learning environments for engineering organizations on it, we can take advantage of all the great aspects of dojos from over centuries, right? So these martial arts studios where people go to learn martial arts, but not only just learn them, but to practice them with repetition over and over and really get good at their skills. And while you're in this dojo, you work with a master or a coach. So I think in a lot of ways we got lucky. There's a longer story behind this, but the dojo was almost called the goat farm because dojos originated from a desire to learn DevOps, and there are all these farming metaphors in the DevOps community. I'm really glad we settled on dojo, and that became the metaphor that we built on. The important aspects, I think, a few of them that we benefit from applying this dojo metaphor, we've got the coaching. The dojo itself is a safe learning environment, kind of like the martial arts studio. When you go there and you spar with a partner, you're not really in danger. You're not in a real fight. So it's this safe learning environment. The dojo is a similar thing. By taking teams out of their normal work environment for 6 weeks and having them come into the dojo, there's this margin of safety for learning. And then finally, the dojo is this space for teams to focus on learning over delivery, which we found to be really powerful.
This dojo idea started years ago, 6 or 7 years ago at Target. If you think back to Target, at that point in time, they didn't know if they were going to be around. Um, they had a lot of the security challenges. They had outages. They thought they were being purchased by Amazon, and they understood that they fundamentally needed to get better across the board. And we were lucky to be a part of that and helping them frame it up. But what's interesting is that idea went from one company to a second company to a third, and we were lucky to be parts of that growth. But this is a picture from our last gathering in 2019. At that point in time, so again, 6 years ago, one company to two. Last year, 35 companies, majority are Fortune 500. This year, I think it's even pushing close to 50. They have a nice community. As well, which I think you all could probably, share ideas across these communities. It's just interesting that this one idea where it was, how do we make a better learning experience, started off as this nice experiment, and these companies are really embracing it and seeing the positive returns on investing in learning in this type of manner.
Okay, brief shameless plug for our book. As Marco mentioned, we did write this book. The idea behind it was you could read this book and start a dojo on your own. Now, I realize I just talked a couple minutes ago about tacit versus explicit knowledge. This is all explicit. So that was the goal when we wrote it, but we knew we would probably fail. But what we think you can do is, if you're interested in experimenting with this model, read this book, join the consortium. The consortium has a Slack channel. There's a LinkedIn group, and there's a video chat for an hour twice a month. So you could join that community and get feedback from other people, ask questions, how they're running their dojos, what's working for them, what's not working for them. And that's really how the Dojo Consortium started to begin with. That was the goal, sharing information about this model.
Yeah, the consortium group reminds me a lot of you all. It's nice to see a community is growing around common ideas. That's what Dion and I have for you. Be great to hear what kind of questions you all have. Possible breakout room ideas. This idea around how do you scale this? This is everybody's, I'm sure, thinking, wow, 6 weeks with a team. That's obviously very intensive. How do you scale these types of things? How do you scale immersive learnings? As well as how do you justify the cost of these things? Just two possible ideas that we get asked frequently. More than happy to talk about them in deeper discussions and breakout rooms. But what questions do you all have?
Thank you, Joel. Thank you, Dion. So I was looking at the chat, and I'll try to kind of merge two questions together from Danielle and Andy. So Danielle is asking, how do you gather, structure, and deliver tacit knowledge, and how do you determine that delivery? And that also kind of ties back to Andy's question of, well, now we're in this sort of remote first world, and some organizations seem to bias documentation, i.e. asynchronous learning versus synchronous. And so how do you do this tacit knowledge transfer, but it's not a thing to transfer, it's a thing to experience, and have it experienced remote first, possibly asynchronously even. So something there that's interesting.
You want to start, Dion, or me to start?
Why don't you go, and then I'll jump in.
Yeah, so there's a lot there to unpack. Those are great questions. I can tell you that the virtual world has been interesting in the sense that our concerns with this kind of model in a virtual world tend to be nicely unfounded. I was concerned that people just wouldn't want to be together and learn, and I've been happy to see that wasn't the case in a lot of organizations. But around writing things down, and people want to go documentation more in this, especially in a distributed world. We experience it all the time. But I think what happens more interesting. So two things end up happening. One, and a very common one, is, okay, so they've documented it, and then I can still work with the team and we can try and use the documentation, and then we figure out the documentation is actually wrong, right? So that happens quite a bit. When that happens, we have to kind of learn on our own and take it forward. But if the documentation is right, just because we've read the thing and we've followed the steps doesn't mean we understand it. And so sometimes what happens is we'll work with teams and they'll follow the instructions and they'll get a pod set up, a Kubernetes pod set up. But we'll start asking them, okay, what are you going to do with it? What do you need to know? What information do you need to know from it? How's it going to help you? And so even if the documentation is good, we still need to make that tie to their context to make it be meaningful for them. So just because the documentation is right, it won't be right for their context. And so we still have to help them tie the two together. What would you add to that, Dion?
We're about at time. So super briefly, a key to the dojo is hiring skilled coaches. And if you're going to teach product discovery practices, the coaches have to know product discovery practices and be able to teach them and answer questions in the moment. That's sort of how we address that tacit aspect. The other thing, real briefly on the remote and virtual, we do a lot of mob programming in the dojo and full teamwork. We utilize Zoom, tools like Miro and Mural. Woody Zool has been coaching with us, kind of helping organizations learn how to effectively collaborate, even remotely doing mob programming. So that's one way we address that.
Cool. Well, thank you both. So yeah, we are at time. I know there was a Benji asked a question about how do you justify 6 weeks to management, and Vidya is asking how do you can you scale this to leadership? And so this kind of ties back to your questions for the possible breakout questions, right? Justifying cost, determining ROI. So it's along that line of thinking, and we hear that a lot at TechKnowCon. Like, how do you justify all this learning stuff, right? That's kind of like a general question. So
it's a silly question, right? Like, how do you justify learning? Well, then just never go to school. Like,
but it's a real issue for a lot of us, right? Justify selling up essentially. So yeah. So with that, I believe that we are gonna be going to. Let me really quickly share this so you kind of know where we're at in our flight plan that we have for you. So thank you, Dion. Thank you, Joel. And super awesome to learn about Creating the Dojo. Like I said, I was super inspired when I read the book. So